Today we are speaking with Christopher Sofer, CEO at Letterhead AI. Before we get started, Chris, why don't you share a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I live in Miami currently. I'm from Washington, D.C., and have been kicking around the media, entrepreneurship, software universe for the last decade or so. When I'm not doing company stuff, I'm into cooking, cocktails, and other things that you consume, eat or drink. Just trying to learn that stuff on the side as a hobby.
I read that you're into pastries. Is that right?
Yes, a number of times a year, I somehow wake up with the notion that it's a good idea at 6 or 7 in the morning to start making croissants, and then we'll go through the process of hand making them. There's a bunch of other things that I will bake that are way easier than that, but I think the pinnacle of difficulty is the handmade croissant, which is a multi-day exercise. Yeah, there's just something really fun about kind of getting through that whole process and getting a product that you can, feel like, wow, I really put all the effort in, and you can appreciate how much went into it. And maybe it's because of like where I spend my time on the professional side, but I like the nature of, if you follow the instructions exactly and you do exactly what is here, you can end up with a pretty good product. And so many things are not like that. So I don't know. I think that's what draws me to that type of thing.
That sounds really good. I'm working on perfecting the brioche, and I think I have perfected tiramisu.
Wow. All right. That's impressive.
So let's get to the topic of Letterhead. Why don't you share with us what inspired you to build Letterhead? And was there a specific moment that kind of sparked that idea?
We started a company 10 years ago now that was around kind of community building in local cities. We started by doing events. We did events every month in Miami where we were getting people together, exploring the city, talking about different civic topics. And we started doing that work actually on behalf of other kind of companies and so forth, kind of an agency. And as we did that, we ended up building this email list that became kind of the core of our business. And so we ended up launching a media brand around that called the New Tropic. And that model we took to a number of other cities around the country and spent a number of years building out that business. And where we started to really get interested in the software opportunity was first when we would talk about the things we were doing and the kind of audience development we were doing, the email products that we were building, and folks were always interested in how we did that in the media industry. But what really piqued our interest was when we started to hear from our advertisers and our partners that were in other industries like healthcare, B2B SaaS, marketing agencies, whatever, other kinds of folks that we worked with were also starting to express a lot of interest in not just email, but in this kind of idea of like owned audience and first party data and these kinds of things beyond just sort of social media or, having a great website or whatever. And as we started to hear those questions a lot, and we had clients that were advertising with us or doing other things, and they would start to ask, well, are you guys also doing newsletters? Will you manage that for us? Do you do audience strategy? And like, these were not things we were doing as a business, as a service. But it was interesting to us that the conversation was very similar across multiple industries, and that media companies were starting to talk a lot like B2B or B2C marketers. And the reverse was also happening, where you started to see a lot of what I would consider kind of like media industry thinking or analysis dropped into some of these, marketing flows at other kinds of companies. And where the part of the world I came up in around user-centered design and things like that, one of the things you're always thinking about is what's the common among the uncommon. Like, okay, I see this thread that is similar across these different disparate groups. Like, that's always a very interesting thing to pull on. And so that was what originally got us interested in, hey, maybe we can take some of the tools that we built for ourselves and build software out of that and help other companies with these audience engagement, community building kind of questions that it seems like so many people are starting to wrestle with. So that was the original spark for us in 2019, 2020, which is when we first started working on Letterhead.
That's great. And so Letterhead provides ability to streamline newsletters. Can you share why newsletters, like why people are so interested in those and how Letterhead makes that so easy?
Yeah, we talk about Letterhead as a newsletter execution system. So it's software that helps people manage, orchestrate, generate content, control the workflow and editorial process, understand and engage their audience better, grow their open and click rates, and drive revenue from their newsletters and their email channel in different ways. And that execution system basically sits on top of whatever content management system, email service provider, other software they already have. So we sort of plug in over the top and kind of help these teams supercharge the money they're already spending, the work they're already doing, make it more impactful, grow the engagement, launch new products, drive new revenue. We're not really in the business of being an email service provider or trying to kind of replace somebody's MailChimp or Campaign Monitor or whatever. Like those are great products. Our goal is really more how do we help people manage this kind of first party content channel and all the products that they build on top of a product like that. So that's where we live. Why newsletters, I think, is a great question because I actually don't believe in like capital N newsletters that much in the sense that I think one thing you see if you've been around the media space a long time is there's kind of always like a current thing that's got everyone's attention. That's the trend of the moment. And those investment cycles are like always behind where things are actually headed, just because it takes the market a while to react, right? And so first it was mobile, and then it's social media, and then it's video, and then it's it's TikTok, it's email, it's newsletters. There's always kind of a trend of the moment. And I think if you're a marketer or you're a media company or whatever, you got to be really skeptical of those things because it tends to be that the things that are durable are durable. They're around for a while and they're kind of consistently great. Like I think about conferences and trade shows, that's something people have been doing for centuries and it's still super effective, right? Like it tends, it's not something that, there are ebbs and flows to it, but it's not something that has this kind of, bang, it's there. Suddenly it takes over the world by storm. I think you got to be skeptical whenever something appears out of nowhere like that, because behavior markets just don't move that quickly typically. And when it does happen, there's usually something worth looking at or learning, but I think you got to be careful not to just like rush in because it's the thing of the moment. You got to really understand where you're at first and what your contribution could be and what you can get out of a new channel. I think the same thing applies to all the AI tools and so forth. But so newsletters for me, it's just a tool and a type of product that serves one piece of the puzzle in an engagement lifecycle. Like the thing that you will really care about is how do we help people build long-term lasting relationships with their customers, their prospective customers, their fans, their readers, their community members, whatever it is. There's this real value always, but particularly today, in a kind of long-term commitment and relationship with those folks where you feel like we know each other, we trust each other, people trust this brand and the brand has a relationship to them and provides value to them. The more visible and tangible that can become, I think the better off a lot of businesses are, particularly in a moment where it's getting easier than ever to churn out kind of super mid quality, low quality AI generated stuff. The signal to noise ratio, becomes really hard for everybody. And email is certainly an example of that, where everyone's inbox, including mine, is absolutely slammed with garbage. And the challenge becomes how do we put high quality stuff in there? And so newsletters are a way to say, I think, to your audience, like, I value your time. I want to deliver something valuable to you in your inbox on a consistent basis and help you engage more with this topic or this space or this industry. And maybe some of it's my content, maybe some of it's other content I thought was interesting, whatever. But it's just a way of saying, hey, we're both in this same interest area. Let me deliver something of value to you. And, we'll have that kind of consistent engaged time together. So I kind of think of it like a two-way exchange of value. And there's a bunch of other channels that are like that, but newsletters are a great one. So we don't say why newsletters like, oh, this is the number one channel. It's we don't think of it that way. We think of it like, hey, email is a really core part of the first party data community building strategy that every business should have. And how do we make sure it runs really well? It's getting harder and harder to do that for all these very detailed technical reasons. And why should every company have to become an expert at that? Like, okay, you should be able to have kind of software as a thought partner to help you manage and master that. So that's really what we're in the business of doing.
Yeah, and relationships are definitely important, and encouraging that lifetime value of a customer and getting them to become advocates for you. That's what everybody wants at the end of the day. Can you, yeah, can you share a customer like story an example of how someone's used your platform?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have the privilege of working with a lot of media companies and brands that are, trying to kind of grow their impact and scale their email channel. Now, they're often starting with really great content and community, and then it's a question of, okay, how do we do this at a different scale? So, a couple of cool ones that I think are worth mentioning, and this is not, out of forgetting any of our other awesome customers, but just some interesting ones. We have a partner named Global Post that publishes a world news newsletter with international news from around the world. And they do it through a variety of partners in different universities, media companies, et cetera, where they have really interesting engaged audience already, but maybe that international world news is not a current part of what's available to those folks. So they partner with a lot of newspapers, universities, other folks, and they're distributing this world news newsletter with that partner to these different audiences. And it's a really cool mission because, particularly in the US, there's not nearly enough access and kind of exposure for a lot of people to global news. And it's something that they do really well. And they figured out this really cool distribution model. And so what we do is we help them, send every day 100 plus newsletters to different audiences with their partners and engaged, folks and across that whole network. And Letterhead essentially supports them in making that way easier, allowing a small team to manage that whole operation, et cetera. And so that's where we plug in for someone like Global Post, is sort of helping them scale and run that channel at a big scale with a relatively lean team, and being able to target and personalize all these different audiences with each of their partners, makes that content way more impactful. But if you were to do that in a manual way, absent a solution like ours, it'd just be super difficult to do, in an efficient way. So that's one example that we think is really cool. Happy to talk about it.
And how are you using AI to support that?
Yeah, so we use AI and machine learning and natural language processing and all kinds of things, you know, to try and make people's content more effective, to try and improve their workflows, and to help them get better data out the other side of that process. So the first thing for us is really, how do we help make the product more efficient? One of the challenges in email is that it's very manual in a lot of cases, the workflows. You have this process where, hey, we know what we want to send out, what we want to do, and we're going to take that content, but then somebody's got to copy paste it into the newsletter, or they've got to manually move it around. Then they've got to check it. Two people need to work on it at the same time, and there's all these kind of difficulties in the workflow. And in some cases, there might be production tools that help design the newsletter, but then we've got to take it, we've got to put it in this other system and make it look good. There's a lot of kind of friction that slows it down. That's even if you're just doing one thing. But most of our customers are sending different email products to different audiences. Some of them are automated, like when there's breaking news. Some of them are manual. Some of them are for different brands or topics or partners. And so as soon as you scale the channel over multiple different audiences, it becomes exponentially more complicated. We have customers who are sending, 6, 7, 800 different newsletter products to different audiences in their company. And, without the right kind of tooling and workflow, that can very quickly become something that takes, dozens of people to manage, or even more to manage on a day-to-day basis. And that's just kind of a non-starter in a lot of cases, right? We need the channel to be more efficient than that. And so that's kind of production efficiency is one big thing that we focus on. And there's a bunch of automation and AI and so forth in our tool that is designed to support that process. And the second big thing is about, how do we improve engagement? That's a combination of truly automated, kind of data driven decision making that we do in our product, and support kind of service experience as well. That's about ensuring there's good deliverability, domain reputation, all these kinds of things. But also that we're kind of looking under the hood and seeing, okay, what kind of content is somebody reading? What's interesting to each user? And how do we make personalization and targeting more accessible to companies? Because there are tools that exist that can help you do this stuff at scale, but they're typically like incredibly complex and incredibly expensive and very difficult to tool and implement. And so a lot of the time you see people not necessarily getting all that theoretical value out of that kind of product. And so we think about, okay, how can we help them supercharge that?
Yeah, that's great. I see how AI is definitely helping with the scale and the personalization and the ability to execute, I'd say, on hundreds at once. Are there any other trends that you're seeing with all of the customers using your offering or just in media in general that you think companies should be paying attention to?
I think the biggest thing is really about being able to deepen the relationship with the audience. Like that's very meta, but the biggest trend that I would say for companies to pay attention to right now is how well do you understand the audience that you have and your different subgroups within that? How much data do you have about them? You know, how much do you understand their kind of preferences around content and engagement? What kind of value you can deliver to them? And what kind of longer term relationship you can establish with your brand. And that doesn't just go to email. I mean, that you see what's happening in LinkedIn and other channels now as well, where there's a big focus on personality driven marketing, kind of building the brand over time, et cetera. Because buying cycles in some respects are becoming shorter and more efficient, but in another way they're actually becoming way longer because people take the time to learn your brand and they've heard it in the background and built up a set of ideas about it way prior to engaging with you. And that's true for media companies in the same way it's true for any other brand, that there's a kind of long tail to this stuff that I think people underestimate. Because in the first or second version of the web, it was like, hey, we can track this immediate click and we can see whether you made a purchase right there on that visit. And so there was a very it was easy to kind of do this very short term conversion kind of marketing and to focus on that, not wrongly. But as that gets harder to do and that data gets obfuscated and companies like Google and Apple sit in the middle increasingly, and there's privacy implications and all these other things, it becomes harder and harder to sort of have this very direct kind of connection to that impact. And so you have to think longer term. You have to think about what's the relationship I have with somebody over 3, 6, 12, 24 months, that helps them understand who I am and what I care about and so forth. And that I think has taken root in a number of marketing verticals as kind of a way of doing business, but it certainly hasn't moved fully into the media industry where, because it's often more ad driven and so forth, you still have a lot of impetus to think in a shorter time cycle and think about, driving page traffic or kind of building audience in the moment. And we're starting to see that slowly shift into a longer term thinking that is about, even if it's a smaller total number of people, we're really engaged with this core audience that really cares. Like that's kind of the foundation of everything. And that's certainly true even for us as a software company, like that core of customers who really value our product and, are growing with us and helping us improve it and so forth. I mean, that's just so valuable. That's kind of the heart of any company. And so we see a lot more people thinking about how they can invest in that core audience, that core community, and do it for a longer kind of time horizon. So, and it's hard to do that often because marketing gets measured in really short turnaround time cycles, as you undoubtedly know, and so that's a big part of it. But I don't know, curious what you think about that, given your experience.
I think this is new to me, actually, like the way that you're using your offering and building out a platform that I'm realizing right now is really targeted towards large media companies. At least that's how I'm seeing it. Like it benefits them. I'm working with smaller SaaS startups, AI startups, and the trends that I'm seeing is it's all around content development and using AI to help support content development, but in a way that isn't generic sounding. So it's about creating greater efficiencies in production. So the way that I've been using it is just feeding it information, tons of information and frameworks. And it's amazing like what it does. It delivers it in the exact framework that I want. And I can make edits in the platform that I'm using, and it will export it in a DAC, in a PDF, as a JPEG image. And then I can take that into another software product if I really want to fine tune it. For me, that's where I'm seeing a personal benefit. And for email as well, I use it for automating outreach and a lot, and building out email sequences that generate interest, respond to them. And so there's no need to really hire this team. I hate to say this, but this team of SDRs anymore because there's so much greater efficiencies now. I think, you still need somebody to review and respond. I don't think it's there yet where it can kind of take over that human role of continuing the conversation. You don't need to sit there anymore and think about what I'm going to say in this first email. That's where I personally found great efficiencies around email. And I can see that being, useful in newsletters as well.
Yeah, and it's becoming partly because it's becoming easier to run these kinds of outbound and other programs in an AI driven way. The total volume of this stuff is going up, right? So like everybody's been getting in the last year, couple of years, so much more, inbound sales email and these other things. And one of the things we see is of course number one, I think in general, you get to decide as a business, where you want to be living. But certainly we're interested in how do you help companies with this kind of quality position. I mean, most businesses are going to end up with some of both, right? But our view is that there's going to be a flight to quality around where people spend time in the inbox as it gets noisier as a channel, right? And you almost think about it like physical mail, where there's a ton of noise in that particular signal, but when you get something that really feels unique and interesting that is physically present to you, you're like, wow, this feels really special, because the vast majority of stuff you get is crap. And so, email we feel is going to go in a very similar direction, because the inbox providers, the Gmails and Yahoos and so forth, the world, are very invested in trying to reduce the amount of spam that people get and improve the quality of their inbox, help them categorize all these kinds of things. And that can be a problem, depending on the way your business operates, or it can be an advantage. And we are really in the business of trying to help people make that an advantage. And certainly for media companies, one of our core audiences. We also work a lot with agencies, B2B software, a number of other verticals. But for all these verticals, our view is like, okay, how do we get to the side of the equation where that narrowing of the pipe, where people are, the filters are going up, the systems are becoming more stringent about what they consider high quality and high reputation. We want you to be on the good side of that fence, right? And if we're focused on delivering high quality content consistently to people that they actually want to read, then that is a connection point that becomes way harder to disrupt, because there's a real engagement there. There's a two-way value, exchange that's happening there. I'm not just like, hey, I need you to open my email. I'm like, I'm going to provide something that you want, and then you might read and click on it. And like, it's a little bit more old school in that way of thinking about kind of value delivery, instead of like something that we have to juice. But like that is we think the winning position in email. And it's literally like in our mission statement, because our focus is how do we help people unlock the full potential of this channel, but through emails that people actually want to get. Like, and that is the key element. And so sometimes we've had customers come to us and say, right now we know we're not there. We want to get to a place where the quality is higher, the engagement rate is higher, the open, and we've helped folks do that in some cases, double or triple the open rate through our product, driving them to these higher quality things, and also automating a lot of this like email maintenance background stuff that is very technical and specific, and there's not much reason for people to have to become experts in. So we've helped people do that. But we've also had people come knock on our door where they aren't necessarily interested in that, because their business, maybe it's a little more on the side of like super high churn and burn, send a ton of email, we're okay with a 0.0 whatever response rate, maybe a little bit more on the spammier side of the fence, right? We've had people approach us, with that kind of use case. And that's a conversation where we say, listen, like, this is our mission, this is what we're focused on. And if your goal is to move in this direction, like, we're your people. If your goal is not, then we're probably not the right solution for you, right? Because it takes a certain kind of commitment to say, hey, I want to focus on quality and that longer term relationship. But in the end, it pays off, and technically where the channel is going. But certainly our view is that's absolutely mandatory at this point, that people invest in that higher quality way of doing things.
I appreciate the integrity, like you're willing to say no.
And certainly for me, like running the business, like my inclination was always like, well, the revenue would be pretty good, so let's figure out how to do it, right? But we've inculcated that enough in our culture that actually people on our team were like, Chris, like, no, like, this is a bad idea, right? This particular one or whatever. And it's like, okay, they're totally right. So it's actually really fun to see the company sort of, having internalized that enough to push back on the sales end and say, this one's not a good fit for us. This is really fun to see. But yes, you do hesitate for a moment if the revenue potential is good.
So, I mean, and you're staying along with your mission of providing value and long-term value for readers and customers. So which can be a differentiator. So, where else do you see yourself differentiating from other similar competitors in the market, if there even are them?
Yeah, I think that's a big one for sure. A second one for us we're really focused on is kind of the service and support experience. So we are a very hands-on kind of experience when we work with folks. They have dedicated account management. We have like super responsive support that's staffed by people who like know the channel and know the space really well. All of that is we think kind of table stakes when you're working with businesses that are investing in the channel. Like we really talk about it as, hey, we want to be a thought partner. We want to be a strategic partner to you on mastering this particular slice of the world, right? Particularly as it becomes more complicated, the choice is either like hire a consultant, become an expert yourself, hire a new headcount internally, or whatever. But often these businesses are already putting a lot of money out on the table for the channel with their ESP, their CRM, et cetera. And so it's like, hey, we've already made a big investment here, and so we think about it as kind of closing that execution gap to get the mileage out of that investment you're already making in a more efficient way. And so that focus on kind of the service and support side is also really huge for us. We also have done a bunch of things in our email builder, the actual content creation side, that make it really efficient, nice to work with, and allow folks to build high quality things, but in a very rapid and automated way. That's a big investment that we've made as well that we think is really important. And the last one is about that multi audience, multi newsletter use case. So we work with a lot of associations, large media companies, like you mentioned, agencies that have many different clients, because we've got all this tooling in the software to kind of manage across all of that as well. Those are big ones for us. And so when you take it together, it's like, how do we help you do this really well at scale with a certain level of efficiency with ROI you could track, and you've got the company not just like, here's your login, good luck, but actually providing support to you, kind of day to day to make sure you're getting the most value from that. That's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, that's nice. I'd like to turn the conversation around a little bit and talk about you as CEO, and curious to know what's most important to you. How are you spending your time?
It's a great question. I love that framing too, because it's sort of, hey, where you spend your time is what's actually important to you. I really like that. And I wonder how often that lines up for people too. But so we've actually had the benefit of going through some evolution here, and it's been really fun. And there's somebody who I'm now not going to remember who it is, but somebody who said like, over the course of growing a company, if you're the CEO from the beginning up through some stage of growth, like you are actually several different CEOs, like sort of different iterations. I think that's actually true in a lot of roles, right? Like being the first marketing person is, very different from being the marketing leader at, a 5-person team, a 20, like they're just different phases. And there are some people who can do many phases. There are some people who can only do one or two. And like, it just depends on where your skill set is. So I've been through that journey. And as we've grown the team, I've been able to move more and more into a kind of strategic uh, place across the business, looking at how we're tying together our sales, our marketing, our product, our technology, our service experience, like all of this. And that's been really, really fun. I come out of being much more focused on the sales side of the equation. So all of our early kind of revenue and customer base was largely built by me along with one of my colleagues. And so I was super involved there in all the early innings. I think that's super healthy, obviously, because it just forces the business to be thinking about that. And I've got amazing co-founders, and we had a really great early team spinning out of our other company that enabled that. But yeah, I was very, very sales focused, and over the last year or so, I've really been able to expand the kind of attention and work across the whole business, which has been a really, really fun transition for me, just like personally, to get to have a kind of more expansive purview and be thinking a little more holistically.
I think pretty common for founder led sales initially. But now that you've been experiencing different teams and different parts of the company, is there an area that you particularly like?
Great question. Obviously, I think that the people element is really critical as the company grows. We have a goal on the board always of how do we make this a great place to work and that people are excited to be at and feel like they can grow in and so forth. I think that matters more and more as the company grows because you end up with different levels of people and different interests. And as a remote company, we're sort of got people from all over, which creates an extra layer of value, I think, because you get different backgrounds and experiences at the table. But it also creates complexity, right? Because not everything runs the different holidays in different countries and all kinds of little things that sort of, pop up as you grow. And so how do you keep the people running in an efficient way with a high quality experience day to day. That's one that I've really enjoyed, and we're trying to invest more in right now. Creating the right type of culture and reinforcing that, and thinking about what that looks like at 50 people versus at 10 people. So there's a lot of fun in that, I think. Look, I think at the end of the day, it's all about the product, right? Like if you're in software, the product is the thing that matters. So that's the place that I think we feel the most kind of value in investing in, because that's what we deliver to people. So, we've got to make that as great as we possibly can.
So, any goals in terms of product updates or expansion of the team or anything else that you can share happening on the horizon over the next, say, 6 months to 2 years?
Yeah, there's a ton of exciting stuff on the horizon. We're really in the process of rolling out a number of really big new features through the back half of this year that we're excited about, that, are really responsive to things that our customers have asked for or are starting to work on. We try to be super proactive in that, and like hearing what they're asking for, and sort of building from that and navigating by what our customers are telling us. That's a big thing for us. There's a lot of stuff on the product roadmap that I'm very excited about, that's about really doubling down on these things. How do we make the production more efficient? How do we supercharge these existing teams? How do we help them grow their engagement more effectively, drive more revenue? We're just trying to make that easier and easier and smarter so that our product can do as much of that work as possible for folks, and kind of be that strategic partner through software. So that's the thing I'm most excited about, is what's on our product roadmap through the rest of this year. But yeah, we're also, we're growing. We're adding more engineers to our team. We're starting to expand our marketing kind of work. That's been a place we haven't invested as much, because we've been so focused on the product and on kind of sales and our customers, that we haven't invested as much in talking about the things we care about, and starting to share the things we're learning, and, all of this in a more proactive way. So that's a big new one that I'm excited to see us invest more in as well. And the space is changing really quickly. So the other thing that we're doing a lot of is trying to look in front of that, 2, 4, 8 quarters kind of out, where things are headed, and trying to be a good partner to our customers there. So we're also putting a lot of energy into that kind of look ahead. How are things shifting and changing? Because one of the things our customers, are thinking about always is like, how do I avoid getting surprised? And in many cases, some of the big changes in email over the last few years have come real fast for a lot of companies. And so the more we can help them see in front of that, the better, they're going to do. And that's what we're here for.
So, what are some of those changes, or what are you seeing happening?
There's obviously a kind of privacy regulatory environment that is getting more and more inclined to sort of be cautious around data collection and data sharing, and those kinds of things. Our assumption, I think a lot of companies already operate like this, but our assumption is that the GDPR kind of approach will become increasingly common, not necessarily in that exact form, but that you just have to live in a more restrictive universe, and be ready for that. Again, I think that's one of those things where if you can turn that to your advantage, then that serves you really well. And that's what we're in the business of trying to do, is, hey, this shouldn't be an impediment, actually be, powering your business. That's what we try to talk about. So the regulatory environment, for sure. There's also a lot of change happening through the platform providers. Certainly there's the cookie kind of things that are going on, but in email specifically, folks like Apple doing their mail privacy protection, where they're, loading content on a proxy server, and it's sort of prefetched, it messes with people's metrics, and there's further things that'll happen there. And also the presence of, AI summaries and tagging and tools in the inbox will sort of reduce the need for people to open and interact with individual emails. And so what does that do, to your content in the inbox in that type of universe? So it's mainly about the technology providers that are kind of intermediaries to some of these things, and about the regulatory environment. Those are the two biggest ones. But I also think you really have to be thoughtful about behavior and how human behavior is changing. And that's a much more qualitative exercise, but keeping a finger on that pulse, I think, is really important. And in particular, a thing that is have been happening for a few years, but we think is really critical, is just thinking about exhaustion and kind of content internet burnout, and what's your role in that. When you go do qualitative interviews with people, you just hear a lot of this, that, particularly post pandemic and everything, people have a kind of like media overload sort of sensation, and folks wanting to decompress and de-digitize, and, get away from their phones and these kinds of things. I think there's also you're gonna see that kind of counterbalancing to all the growth in AI driven tooling and so forth. There's always a natural kind of self balancing system there. And so, again, you got to think about, well, where does your content, where does your marketing live in that universe? And where do you fall for people? And what kind of things do you offer? And if you're in the breaking news business, do you also offer an antidote to that that balances out, that kind of very high paced thing with something, a little bit slower and calmer or not? Maybe that's your brand. So just really having a kind of humanistic kind of view to like what you're offering in a channel like email too is something we try to work with folks on a lot, because our view is that email is not going anywhere, but people's behavior around it is absolutely cyclical and it has these kind of big changes to it as society changes. So you got to be thinking about that too, even though that feels very like meta and vague. It's really important.
Yeah, I definitely get the burnout. There are times where I'm just like, I have to shut my computer down for 3 days. But you mentioned something that struck some interest in me is that we might not have to read our email anymore. Like it might be a bot or something AI related might present to us what are the most important things inside our emails that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's absolutely where things are headed. I mean, there are some of those products are in various stages of availability today. At some level, I think there's a natural limit to that just because the original intention around email is more person to person communication. And I actually don't, and some of the products I've seen being experimented with here are like, it's summarizing all the individual emails I got from people today or whatever. And I'm actually not convinced that that's how people want to interact with that part of it. Like the individual emails I get from individual people I know, I'm happy to interact with individually because it's more like receiving a letter or whatever, right? Uh, but then there's like the messages where in the olden days where like your secretary is coming in being like, here are all the messages you received. Which ones do you want to call back? I think it's actually more like that, right? But in that era, the people you actually knew who you wanted phone calls from, you still took those phone calls directly. Your secretary didn't take those, right? Like that's not how. So I think there's kind of an intermediary thing there, but I think it looks more like that, where here's the stuff that you want, we're giving it directly to you. Here's the stuff that you probably don't need to interact with. Here's the kind of important bits. And then here's stuff that we think is garbage. We just kept that out. We didn't tell you about it because you didn't need to know. Like that's already where Gmail is at if you're using the tabs and so forth. It's basically that, right? So I think it's going to become more and more like that. But if you're a publisher or you're an agency, you're a B2B brand that does thought leadership content marketing that you distribute via email, these kinds of things, you got to think about that, because if you're perpetually in that tab, and just kind of getting summarized, are you building the brand equity that you need to be building, right? I think that's a big question. And so you got to think about interactivity. You got to think about closing that engagement loop with other channels so that people know when to look at the email, these kinds of things. And so for marketers who aren't in the media business, I actually think the media industry, despite all of its problems, is doing a very, very good job right now thinking about those engagement loops and how to close them. And so there's some really cool case studies and experimentation around, the social to the email to the website touch point and how to connect those together to make sure people are interacting with all of them in a way that deepens that engagement and so forth. And so we're often in conversations with marketers saying, hey, here's a cool news company in XYZ city or industry whose strategy for this you should check out, even though it's a completely different kind of space. The way they're thinking about adding value to these channels is really advanced because they're in the business of getting people to interact with these channels. They're not selling some other product that is their product. And so they have to be kind of out there experimenting. So I think that actually there's a lot of cross learning that should be happening between other kinds of marketers and the media space more than happens today for that reason.
Yeah, I think multi-channel marketing just to keep the topic or the product in front of someone with consistent messaging always does better. I always like to ask a question around a challenge. So if there's one issue or something that you could fix, whether it could be within the product or the team or a challenge that you're facing within the business, what would that be?
It's a great question. I think the biggest challenge that we're wrestling with right now is how to empower a larger team to work as autonomously as possible. I think it's what everybody wants. I mean, we have a team of people who desire that. That's part of the reason they came to work here, right? Is that we talk about that and we want that. It's a different thing to have 50 people working in a distributed way where the ownership of projects and the ability to kind of drive your thing forward without instruction, day to day. Um, Making that more diffuse across the company. It's a very different thing at 50 people than it is at, 10 or 15 people. And there's not the ability for kind of osmosis or sort of background de facto stuff to drive that as much as there is in a smaller business. And so when your team gets bigger, you have to really think about, like we were talking about before, systematizing, process, these kinds of things. And in our case, adopting a very written culture, where there's a kind of practice around writing things down and communicating clearly about them and so forth, becomes such a key investment. And I'm really excited about the way people have taken to that, and the level of focus we see on it inside the business. But I think it's one of those things that's kind of a perpetual challenge. Like, it actually never goes away, because you've got to be, if you're trying to grow quickly and be a fast moving business, you've got to push accountability down the org chart. It can't be a top down kind of, oh, it's my vision. And, it has to really be something that everybody has some autonomy around. But if you can't figure out how to actually let them execute in a day to day way without too many obstacles and barriers, then, people are going to the high performers get really frustrated. Other folks feel like they lack direction, and you just end up with a lot of struggle in that. So I think it's one of those things you just have to kind of be constantly paying attention to. But that's one that's on my mind a lot right now, is the right way to implement, the most autonomy possible for everybody on our team at scale.
Do you guys have like a gold star or a mission that you're all driving towards to unify around?
Absolutely. We've got big North Star mission. We've got individual annual and quarterly goals, that we measure, and a whole practice around that. I think that's part of what helps us do that work, And so we've been on this journey over the last year, every quarter, to give more and more autonomy and ownership down the org chart, around things that drive up to these goals, right? That we want kind of everybody having a direct touch point to those things, being able to see how their work impacts it, and having a piece of that they own, and are get to say, hey, like, this is something that I owned and built and drove, right? That it's that the amount of ownership you have around some of those things is not purely driven by your job title. So as we've invested more and more in that, we've seen faster and faster results in the company, which is really fun.
That's great. Spoke to someone else that I interviewed, was talking about how, I don't know if it's at his company, but it was another company where every person has the ability to make a decision, irregardless of their role, as long as it's not going to cost the company or it's under the value of $6,000.
Yeah, I
And that
love that.
could, yeah, it could be from janitorial staff all the way up to, president, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think if your objectives are clear and people know where you're headed, then you ought to be able to extend a lot of rope to people, because if everybody's aligned on where they're supposed to be going and what we're trying to get to, that should be something we can achieve, right? I also think people underestimate, certainly I have for a long time, like, just underestimate the extent to which you have to repeat and refocus and remind people of those big goals, but also the extent to which people really crave that, right? That people who come to work at early stage, like, high growth companies, they want that North Star. They want to be working on that bigger mission or idea, and because there's a kind of self filtering if you just kind of want to do a job and not be bothered too much. And, that's perfectly fine. But there's, like, definitely not a fit for this type of business, of course, that, we're both of us have experience in. And so you get people who really want that. And so I think as a leader, you also have to be reminding yourself that, you got to provide more of that than you think. Sort of, hey, we presented it, okay, great, right? And it's like, no, that's actually a weekly exercise. It's a day-to-day thing of reinforcing that and making sure people feel alignment to it, so that you can give them that type of decision making power. 100%.
And any other advice that you give to CEOs that are in a similar position as you, or maybe first timers and they're just starting on this journey?
I think one of the most powerful tools you can bring to bear at the beginning or perpetually on an ongoing basis is qualitative, deep research with the people that you want to serve, whose pain points you want to solve. We did this at the early phase of our media businesses and at the early phase of Letterhead. And there was a phase where you kind of went too long without refreshing that. What's so you don't have to do a ton. You do like 5 to 10 deep interviews with people. I think they should really be in person, although increasingly you just kind of got to do them digitally. Understanding over the course of a longer time and compensating people for that. But like, what is it like to be you? What are your goals at work? Like, what kind of tools you? It's not about like, hey, I do email software. Show me your email software. It's not like that. It's like, what's it like to be this person? It's a little bit more detached. But let me just observe and watch and see and ask questions and understand this person's context in with a little bit more grit and depth, right? And if I have that context, that kind of fabric to grab onto, it makes it so much easier to understand where your product fits in, where how a certain feature might perform best, how to talk about the value from a marketing or sales context in a way that's going to resonate with people, because you get trapped in your own box of how we talk about stuff. And in our world it's like email terminology and blah blah blah. And there is a lot of advice out there in startups, like talk to your customers and listen to your customers. 100% is obviously what we should be doing, but particularly in the early stage, I think you could overdo that where you don't have a sense of what other people who are like your customers are also experiencing. And it may be that the people you've got as early adopters of your product are early adopters. They don't look like the rest of the market. It's like classic crossing the chasm stuff, right? But the only way to know that is to like get out there and like spend time with people. But a lot of times I see people doing that kind of research and it's very like direct on the nose, like, hey, we're working on this, tell us about how you use this. And that is, it's like somewhat helpful. But if you made me pick one research thing or one kind of thing to go out and look at, it would not be like, for our space, it wouldn't be like, tell me about your email software. It would be like, walk me through a typical day. Like, what are your core goals? How are you measured in your job? It would be very little about the actual software. The actual software is my job. I'm supposed to be good at figuring out how to make software for you. What I need to know is like, what is your life like? And therefore, where could my thing fit in? Like, it's a little bit more abstract. And I think people feel like it can be a bit of a luxury to do that. Certainly, there was a phase where I did. But if you let that go too long or you don't have enough of that like baked into your core culture, you lose that touch point with the kind of little decisions and kind of instinct that guide you to making good choices. So that would be the number one thing I would say is like, you're probably not spending enough time talking to people in this kind of deep way. And you can outsource it, although I think if you're certainly in the early stage of a company, you got to do it yourself because you just need that gut instinct to guide you. And if you don't have a well of good kind of primary research to ground that instinct in, your instinct probably will be wrong. And so, that can line you up for problems.
I think that's really great advice. I think the part where you mentioned expressing value and be able to communicate that can be difficult for founders. I'm assessing 5 websites right now, and every single one of them talks about just the product. And some of them highly technical details on their website about here's the product and here's the AI functionality and here's how we built it. And that doesn't resonate at all to the person who's going to buy their product. They, a lot of them don't even care about that. They just want to understand, how is this going to make my life easier?
We did that exact same thing. Even though I've just gone on this 5 minute thing about do the research. We went through a phase at Letterhead where our website was literally like that. It was like this, it does this, it has these features, it was like zero kind of value positioning. We took a minute with a partner of ours who's really good at this stuff and helped us drive the process. We took a beat to go back and say, all right, let's recontextualize this. So what's in it for me, right? And it just like immediately shifted our business in all the right ways. So yes, I've totally been there because you're building and you're busy and you're like, well, what do people want to know? They want to know you get on a sales call. They want to know what the features are. So here are the features. Like, but then we could do sales with just like, here's a Google Doc with all my features listed. Do you want to, like there wouldn't be a need for any of this other stuff if that was how people bought things, but it's not, right? And I think you're totally right. The value orientation is often not there. And even if you know it, you got to know how to talk about it in a way that people are going to go, yeah, like I got to spend 30 minutes on this, and that's tricky to do.
So, Chris, if someone wanted to learn more about Letterhead or even get in touch with you, what would be the best place for them to go?
Yeah, anybody can email me, Chris at letterhead.ai. Love to chat with folks and learn about what people are doing and so forth. So please definitely reach out. Our website is letterhead.ai, and you can learn about our product and so forth there. We're also out on the road a lot. So our team is present in a lot of different industry conferences in kind of the marketing world, the agency world, the media world. So we'd love to catch up with people there as well. And we're pretty active on LinkedIn in terms of talking about where we're going to be and all that kind of stuff. So yes, please get in touch. We'd love to chat, learn about what you're working on. And if email is a priority and it's a channel you want to invest more in, we'd love to see if we can help.
Great. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.